parents came out. They were allowed to protest. In Kericho, we had these tea picking machines. Farmers were allowed to protest. But here in Nairobi, the police brutality was serious. I'm looking at your report, and you are giving figures. I think you've talked of 94. You've also talked of 44. When IPOA was before us, they talked of 57 killed by the police. And some were killed by bludgeoning, where the police broke into estates, pulled out people from their houses, and bludgeoned them to death. I buried two of the Nyalenda brothers, Brian and William, very young boys. And it was a very, very sad story. You've referred us to Precious Kemunto, a little baby with a mother in her home, where police break in and throw tear gas in residential areas. And the poor baby suffocated to death. But the majority of the deaths, from what we witnessed, were actually from police bullets. Most of those killed were young fellows, 18 to 30. The bullet wounds, when we looked at the postmortem reports, the death certificates, were from bullets from behind, in the back. Some were shot in the head, running away from the police. Our laws require use of firearms in the prescribed way, where the police are either threatened or they are saving lives. But in the case of where police shoot innocent citizens who are unarmed, I think it's a very worrying thing, and we wanted to know from you in terms of what His Excellency Kalonzo has said. There is this concern, not just nationally, but internationally, of the Kenyan police, who have this year shown very serious disregard for human rights, going outside our borders, 1,000 of them going to Haiti. Of course, it's a matter that we are hoping our parliamentarians will take up so that it is properly debated, whether we should be a country sending our young men in harm's way when there are neighboring countries there that have refused to do so for good reasons. And these are some of the things that we are looking at in terms of the reforms. IPOA had very specific, apart from your recommendations, shielding of officers who have misused their firearms to take innocent lives. These firearms, the ballistics, being handled through the forensic lab that is under the DCI, and the DCI is part of the National Police Service. They are proposing an independent institution to handle that so that evidence is not compromised. The police do not protect their own. Because there's a Ugandan saying that a monkey cannot decide the affairs of the forest. It's very likely that the police can protect each other. So that many cases are compromised, and the police have not been held to account for the brutality they have emitted. I don't know what you think about those recommendations, apart from your 5 recommendations that you've given. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hassan, just as a note, as we oppose the deployment of our police service into Haiti, I'll ask us ourselves as politicians and members to be very careful not to set the ground for very hostile reception. Because what we have been doing, some of us here, is to link the abuses we allege here as probably that's the conduct of these police officers on arrival at Haiti. We are carelessly putting them into harm's way. Once our men and women in uniform are out of this country, whether we agree with the process or not, the least we owe them is some levels of discipline in how we refer to them, so that as we debate the issues, provide for their security, provide for their training, or oppose the issues. I think we must not equate our political biases into putting them into harm's way. So we must be very restrained, because I'm seeing a situation, if some of these utterances, which have come from this committee severally, go viral. I'm told some of those groups are armed. You could be preparing for a very unnecessary contest. It's not going to be a blind mission. I'm not at liberty also to discuss it, but it's not going to be a blind mission. It's going to be done in a manner that the safety and security of our officers will be guaranteed. The government of Kenya is not led by fools. They will make it appear like we will just take 1,000 men and women and just put them there for sacrifice. Number two, I never speak this way, but sometimes I would hope for you also to interrogate some of these demonstrations in a manner, because today I'm talking to peers in the human rights fraternity. They know that I wrote the Charter on Human Rights in the lead up to our elections. We said our first pillar is implementation of the Constitution. And you saw the directives of the President upon election as President of the Republic of Kenya. How is it possible, and be fair, that a demonstration or demonstrators are carrying weapons? Not necessarily ballistic weapons like guns, but they are carrying stones and machetes. These guys prepare themselves. I was there. I know what these demos are. I planned them. I know what we tell each other. Go burn these tires here. Sijui mtu fulani ndio ataongoza pale, yule ataongoza pale. And half the time there is a confrontation between the police. Yes, maybe sometimes the force used is disproportionate, but even where these demonstrations have been left to go on, we have seen, even the time when they said, let them demonstrate. Shops have been looted. Infrastructure has been vandalized. We need to have a real conversation about these issues. And then tell our friends, when they go to a demonstration, you cannot use constitutional means to achieve unconstitutional objectives. But purporting to take oath that this is the time for a revolution under the guise of Article 37 is not the intent of Article 37. Number three, the Constitution has more than one Article 37. It has the sovereign rights. It has other articles of the Constitution, the right to vote, the respect for institutions of the state, including the Supreme Court when it speaks itself. I was very surprised. One of the civil society organizations which monitored the elections told me, hey, this election was free and fair. You guys actually beat this other team. A few months later, he tells me, oh, you know, if there's an allegation by one party, then it needs to be dispensed of. And I'm thinking to myself, on what basis? So I'm not saying even the neutrality of civil society in terms of how it anchors itself in the new discourse, will speak very much to how civil society is then able to navigate the new terrain. Gone are the days when you'll just go to an international community actor and tell them the UDA government or the Kenya Kwanza government is a dictator government. These are men and women. We also engage. Those representatives also have the intelligence agencies. They also have their information. I've come to realize, actually, the reason sometimes government is always on the back foot is because when you're in government, always you are expected to talk less, and even what you have, you reveal as a very measured way. But I can tell you, if you go and get part of the documentation and some of the information that even our counterparts have, that's why sometimes you see their responses are measured. There was a time they will say, in no uncertain terms, that this was wrong. But they understand the design to try and precipitate a crisis so that you divert the country's attention from the economics and try to brand the KK government as a dictatorship. That is not true. And I think those are the kind of things that, as we prosecute in the new discourse, you have friends in this government, they engage at various levels, and I can tell you without a doubt, sometimes we even ask very hard questions internally. I am not sure whether that evidence is, some of it, the credibility to it, but I'll finalize by one thing, and Rajab there can bear me witness. We were defending some terrorism suspects. Unfortunately, these terrorism suspects were arrested alongside one of the human rights defenders. When they were in custody, the revelations they made, when this man was released, he told us some of the things are actually true. How they would transport ballistic missiles, how they would organize, how they would get, you remember those testimonies, how they would get firearms from our neighbors. And when Kamwende told us, we just didn't believe him because we thought it was Kamwende. So Kamwende is lying to us. He is concocting stories. But trust me, at many of these scenes and some of these organizational frameworks for these latest wave of demonstrations, why are people talking about burning tires and carrying this and these guys to barricade these ones and these ones to stone cars that are going to work? And this information sometimes is available to the security agencies. And they also have a DTP, the duty to protect other Kenyans. I do agree where there is excessive use of force, where there is unjustified executions, then those have to be dealt with within the purview of law. But talk to our friends that demonstrations cannot achieve the ends that the elections cannot achieve.
Thank you, Omar. I think we'll hear one day. Did you want to say something, Co-Chair?
You can go first.
Yes, let me say this and start from where my friend Omar has left. Demonstrations, of course, are a way of expressing oneself and properly guaranteed under the Constitution and enabling laws. There's no doubt, really, regardless of the objective. But let me ask you, in your investigations, and I want to agree with you, because actually what you said here corroborates to a very large extent the testimony of a government agency, IPOA, which were before us here yesterday, and they were seated there. Your evidence corroborates their testimony to a very large extent. But let me ask you, because we need to remain as objective as possible, in your investigations, did you come across evidence that the police killings, which have been documented, were a reaction to threats posed by the demonstrators, either the police themselves or any other citizens? Okay? And even in those circumstances, was the use of lethal force, including live bullets, justified? I want to ask another question, and very, very briefly. In your research, I'm sure you do research a lot, and you do in comparable jurisdictions. Under what circumstances can the police service deploy persons who are not uniformed and carrying military-style guns, actually assault rifles, not uniformed, carrying assault rifles, not wearing any protective gear, okay, to face demonstrators or a mob or a rioting mob? What would be the intention of such deployment if not to kill the mob? I hope you get me. That you are not uniformed, which means nobody can recognize you as a police officer. You are not having any protective gear, which means don't fear. You are not scared of any possible assault. And you are deployed into a crowd, which is charged. Okay? Finally, and I posed this question yesterday to IPOA, and they agreed that indeed it is possible for a private entity or person to undertake private prosecution. And this is clear, it's implicit under Article 157 of the Constitution. 157.6, the director of the DPP, rather, shall exercise state powers of prosecution and may, among other things, at B, take over and continue any criminal proceedings commenced in any court that have been instituted or undertaken by another person or authority, and so on and so forth. Of course, this implies that another person or authority other than the DPP can institute private prosecution. Because the case we faced yesterday was that the IPOA has forwarded numerous files against specific police officers whom they accuse of killing Kenyans during demonstrations, and yet those files are still lying at the DPP. Nobody knows what became of them, and nobody for sure knows when they shall ever be released or be acted upon. Is it possible that Amnesty International and related organizations or persons can exercise the right under the Constitution and the law to institute private prosecution against these culpable police officers? Thank you. I'll stop it at that.
Maybe just to say something, my name is Catherine. The demonstrators, as much as they have the right to demonstrate, let them keep off from school zones and know that the children have their right. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes.
Just the demonstrators or the police, because police also tear gassed innocent kids in school, in Westlands actually.
Yeah. That's a very valid point.
It's very, very specific.
Let us keep
the demonstrators.
Police off school areas. Demonstrators also must keep off school areas.
Thank you,
And
Anna
even
Irungu Hutton with your Amnesty International, and we thank you for the good work you're doing. At times, I like us to speak for posterity, because Hassan Omar was chair of the Human Rights Commission. At the same time, I was chair of LSK. And when you speak for human rights, it's always good to speak that you would be on this other side. And I remember one time Ahmed Nasir told us, as a Muslim, Islam dislikes people are dishonest, people are deceptive, people who tell lies. They like honest. So I'm sure all of us here want to have an honest discourse. The point I've picked, which I think is a problem, you have said that there's a problem in prosecuting police officers who engage in police brutality and in violence against innocent people, including, I hope, these two innocent kids who were killed in the hands of police. And we need to get a solution because we need accountability. What we are discussing here is about governance. We need accountability. Now that it seems the police will always be out there to shield their own, would you maybe propose that we need to look for another different legal mechanism? Because it seems from the report you have given us, it seems the police will never prosecute their own. And that's what IPOA told us yesterday. In the US, they have what they call an independent counsel. If you want to prosecute somebody in Congress, you will get an independent counsel. The Attorney General will propose, the High Court will confirm the appointment, then an independent counsel will go and investigate maybe a congressperson or a sitting president or somebody high level in government. Knowing that you know, today that side will be in government. Tomorrow they may not. In Zambia, you saw what Lungu did to